So I'll be interviewing Don as he comes back from his sabbatical today. And earlier this week, I asked Don, do you want me to send you the questions ahead of time, or should I just catch you off guard like you do us every other week? So he was a good sport and said that I did not have to send him the questions ahead of time, which I thought was fair and just.
Just.
So even though we're doing questions, I still welcome your participation and your input throughout as normal. But we'll also at the end, hopefully we'll have time to open up the floor in case you had your own questions that you brought, or if you just have questions as we're chatting along. Sarcastic comments, yes, Amanda. Or you could put them in the chat, but I might be slow to get to them, so somebody else can always voice what's in the chat too. So welcome back, Don.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be back.
So my first question is, if we think back to when you were preparing to go on to sabbatical, what hopes did you have in your heart as you were preparing to go on sabbatical?
You know, honestly, I think I was just at a place where I was trying to figure out how to survive emotionally and spiritually at that moment. I didn't realize how depleted I was until, a couple of incidences right before the discussion of sabbatical came up. That actually was the impetus to the discussion. Conflict with my parents, and then the video of me having a conflict with some protesters. And I think that I really couldn't even think outside of just, have you ever had like either you're sick or just really tired and like all you can think about is getting to your bed, and like just you're someone asking you a question, someone interacting with you at all is just preventing you from getting to bed, and all you can think about, you just become that singularly focused. And I think that's where I was before sabbatical. I needed to get to bed, and I think there was hopes in that of some healing. There was hopes of that, of some refreshing, and having my to be all Christian-y, my cup filled up, all that stuff. All that was there and something I desired. But I think if I was forced to try to articulate exactly what I was hoping for, it was just really I just need to lay down. Obviously that's both literal and figurative of how I was feeling, but yeah.
Yeah, I can identify with that, because sometimes when I'm like on the brink of burnout or overwhelmed, I feel like I don't necessarily get the lay down feeling, but I get the feeling that like I need alone time or whatever it is I think I need, like to be alone, or if it were laying down. But to me, in those moments, it feels like I need to be alone for like a huge chunk of time just to like reset.
Yeah, absolutely.
As opposed to just like, oh, I just need a 1 hour nap. It's like anything small feels like it would only be a drop in the bucket and wouldn't even be worth it. But then like if I actually go to take the alone time, sometimes I don't actually need all that. But
right. Yeah, I think it also just I think many of you, or at least some of you, have experienced panic attacks. It just felt like instead of it being from a situation, like sometimes when I get a panic attack in a setting, I get it's very claustrophobic feeling, and I just need to get out really fast, as I can. And that's kind of how I felt just with life. Like I just felt like my life was claustrophobic. Everything was just closing in, and that everything was stealing my breath. And I was just, so there was a claustrophobia. So, I think it was good. The elders just responded so quickly to my request and everything. And I can't express the gratitude for that enough. Just how quickly everyone was like, let's get this to happen right away. So that was also really helpful for me to just know how supporting the church was, the elders team were, and are, to just, no one hesitated. It was just go, let's do this. Let's get him healthy. So.
Yeah, I had a thought and then I got distracted. So I'm trying to see if the thought's going to come back.
No problem.
That's okay. It'll stop. Well, maybe it'll come back later.
That's fine.
Um, so what did you think a sabbatical was before you launched into it yourself? And how would you describe a sabbatical now that you've gone through it?
So I think, all of my understanding of sabbatical were from, my colleagues and peers who have done it in the past. And theirs often was filled with doing really unique, interesting things, or working on some projects that they wanted to get done and just didn't have time with stuff. So in some ways, a sabbatical to me was just kind of like, I viewed it as an opportunity to explore things of interest that one doesn't necessarily have time to do with their regular day-to-day activity. And also, my friend that most recently went on sabbatical, he went to Scotland and Ireland and just traveled around and did all these things. So, he set an unfair bar of expectation in my mind. But I think what it really turned out to be was, I think it's appropriate that it's played off the word of Sabbath, right? That we spend, I think it's Heschel says in his book on the Sabbath, he says, we spend 6 days a week building our own empire. And then on the 7th, we sit and recognize God's. And I think that the sabbatical for me was really just an opportunity to sit and stop worrying about building. I'm glad Ken Wilson, who met with the elders and coached me throughout the sabbatical, really kept encouraging me not to try and have accomplishment mindset during it, and instead just again, Heschel in his book says that the thing that was created on the Sabbath, because it says, and God finished his work on the 7th day. It doesn't say God was finished on the 6th day and then the 7th day. So him and the rabbi said, what was created on the 7th day that God finished, and Heschel's conclusion is tranquility, and that we sit by the tranquil waters and find rest. And so I think what Sabbath ended up becoming for me was the willingness to sit next to tranquil waters. It reminds me, my brother, his son Garrett, you guys all know Garrett, started school. And at school, now Garrett doesn't take naps anymore, but at school, when they attend, there's an hour nap time where you have to sit on your mat and not do anything, turn off the lights, sit on the mat. And it was, excruciating for him initially, and he's slowly getting better. And that was the same thing for me with, I kept waking up going, I'm wasting my sabbatical. I kept, like, the first several weeks, I'd just be like, I'm wasting my sabbatical. I'm not doing anything. I'll sit and flip through Netflix and not really watch anything, but also just not accomplish anything. And I think what it was learning to sit next to tranquil waters ended up being what sabbatical was about. And I'm glad it was that, as opposed to traveling and having an itinerary and every moment something planned out like some of my friends have done. As much as that looked beautiful and fun, I'm so glad in some ways. And, not in any way do I think it's good that we're in the pandemic situation we're in, but in a lot of ways, the pandemic forced me to sit still, and I needed to. So my next sabbatical, God willing, might look completely different.
Yeah. Well, I love that, because I think that as we talk about Sabbaths being maybe mini sabbaticals that we can try to incorporate into our lives, but it gives permission for all of us to find what Sabbath rhythms match our season of life.
Absolutely.
The season of life is dictated by what's going on in the world around us, but also what's going on in our nuclear family, our immediate people in our household, and what's going on and what can bring us delight and rest and remind us that we're human beings and not human doings for that 24-hour period every week.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'd add to that, Sarah, that I think makes Sabbath complicated for people is that they feel like they need to do it perfectly, or they need to like nail it. And it's okay, like giving yourself permission to not Sabbath well
Yeah.
is really, really healthy. And it took me a while to get to the place where I gave myself permission. I think you and I talked about this on one of our first meetings. It took me a long time to give myself permission to not get anything done.
Yeah.
Or to feel like I was accomplishing even my own mental health, like to not even feel like I needed my mental health to be fixed right there and then, that I could go, this is a process. And right now what I need is to let go of the expectation on myself to be fixed or to be healed or to be whatever. So
yeah. Yeah, and when you shared about Gehrig and not Gehrig, that's my nephew, Garrett, and the nap time and him getting better at it, I think that's also true for silence for us. Like that silence as a spiritual practice can be excruciating at first. To even do like 1 minute might seem like forever, but the more we practice it, silence and even just rest in general, but the more we practice it, the more it becomes, we can actually like build that muscle to be able to sit in that. And
yeah,
over time,
when we lived in Blacksburg, I decided that I wanted to practice 2 hours of silence a day. And it wasn't necessarily 2 consecutive hours, right? Not 120 straight minutes, but each day I wanted to have intentional silence, right? And it was interesting because the first several times I did that, my silence was filled with me having these huge fights and arguments with people, things, events in my life, and just there was like this purging of noise from the depth of my soul, right? That needed to come out, but because I never really intentionally did silence, there was never time for it to come out. And at first I was like, wow, this is terrible and scary. I don't know that I want silence. And what ended up happening was after that kind of purged, I no longer kept that stuff as embedded in my soul. But what I do think happened, which is what led to the sabbatical, is that slowly over time, that habit and that practice of silence went away. And I started burying that stuff again. So silence is kind of like, this is probably a terrible analogy, but we have one of those Ninja Foodies that is a pressure pot air fryer, and it has that release valve that you can hit, and it's done cooking intentionally, right? The heating element's off, and now it's just to release the steam. And I think that in some ways that's what silence provides for us, is this opportunity to just let a geyser of emotion out. And if we do that regularly, then there's less of that buildup and that pressure and intensity in us. So.
yeah, and that reminds me, like, when I was learning about centering prayer, where it's like a lot of silence or maybe just like a mantra, and that when you get distracted, it's okay, just accepting that and just in your mind's saying, okay, well, I got distracted, or even if I fell asleep, I guess I needed to fall asleep, and just like accepting that as an imperfection and it's totally fine. And then you just start right where you are. And it just makes me wonder, like, if this applies to like so many different spiritual disciplines too, that the reason that there's some degree of discipline in these things is that there in the beginning, you may not see what it's going for or where you're going to go. But if you put time in regularly, like sometimes reading scripture isn't always an exciting thing full of tangents you want to research, but sometimes it's just doing your duty, and all those duties like add up. And I remember talking to you at the beginning of the sabbatical too, that like, it was a good thing that you had a goal of a time frame of how long, because you might have wanted to jump ship early and get out of the sabbatical. But
Yes.
there's something to say. And I remember you thinking like, is there something that I'll gain if I go one more week of keeping my bubble intact, and wondering, will that additional layer of time and grace, just, is there something in there that I can access if I continue on? And you did.
Yeah, I think I stayed pretty much silent for 3.5 weeks, really. And I needed it. If, like I said to you, there was no way I could imagine. I wasn't even sure if I could make it to 2 weeks, which was just kind of intentionally built in. And then the end of the 2 weeks got there, and I was like, I still needed that silence, which really surprised me. I had no idea how much I needed it. Right. You said something there that I think is really important, something that Christendom has done that in some ways has harmed people, and not the way you said it, but this term of discipline. And I think it's really important for us when we think about discipline, when we think about faith, or we think about healthy living and being an asset to the world, is that discipline is more so the permission to make mistakes, not the expectation of perfection. And we tend to do it that way, right? Like, if we're like, I have a discipline where every morning I get up and I pray for 20 minutes and I read my Bible, and we confuse that with being disciplined, when actually what is discipline is giving yourself permission to set aside some other things to read the text, giving yourself permission to be distracted when you're reading the text. That's discipline. I think about like a child, right? And, I've used this analogy for sin, but they have the discipline of coloring is good and beautiful. And there's a reason as adults, we all love the idea of coloring, I think still to some level, but we abandon it relatively quickly because we can't do it as perfectly as what we want to imagine it could be. Right. We want like everything to look super nice and perfect, and just everything is filled out, all the details, everything. And our problem is we've confused discipline with perfection. And it's just, that has harmed me in my life, right? Because people all the time, because we do the scribing of the text if you're in discipleship, or even if you're not, I recommend highly scribing out the text and memorizing the passages. And so people are like, wow, if you've been teaching this for X number of years, you must have so much of the text scribed. And I have quite a bit scribed, but the discipline of scribing the text is the permission to also not scribe the text. And I think that that's so important for us, because we can get really bogged down as discipline being corrective actions against mistakes, because that's what we use it for when we talk about disciplining our children, or disciplining a staff, or a student, whatever it might be. It's about correcting mistakes. And that isn't what discipline is. It's the intentionality of always moving towards the one thing as best you can. And in that is inherently permission to not do it well. So, sorry, I'll stop preaching.
Yeah. Well, I think discipline does have a lot of negative connotations to it. So I think that's really helpful. And I was just talking to you over messaging the other day about my piano students this week and their mistakes. And, they seem to really be carrying a lot of what's going on in the world. And when I had 4 students on Thursday, and 3 out of 4 were on the verge of tears or burst into tears in the middle of their lesson. And it was when they were approaching something that was a little bit hard or a little bit challenging, or they just weren't able to perform at the level that they thought they would. And as a teacher, I see the mistakes, and especially also when I was a conductor as well. When you're a conductor and you're in front of a bunch of instruments, sometimes it can actually be really hard to hear the mistakes if somebody's playing too softly. And one of the things that I would always say is make your mistakes loudly, because then I can help you. If you're
Right.
playing timidly and you're playing a B flat instead of a B natural, I might not hear it. But if you're playing loudly, then I can help you and say, oh, you missed that. And but the mistakes are really clues. Like it's clues, it's information, it's a gift, it's something to turn towards wonder at these things that
It's
these
the idea behind sin boldly.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so mistakes is, I love using that perspective. When you share it with me, I thought it was really powerful. I've often used the analogy of pain, right? Like, if your tooth hurts, it means that there's something wrong, right? We would be silly if our goal was to just rid ourselves of pain, but then never address the root, no pun intended with tooth, but the root of the cause, right?
Yeah.
And so the same thing is true with mistakes, which I would argue is more closely a simile to sin in the way the Bible uses it than the way we typically do, is that sin in some ways is the pain of being an imperfect human in an imperfect world and wanting and desiring to move closer to godliness. And so sin is those moments that we recognize that something is not right and it needs to be fixed to be healthy. And it's instead we make sin the focal point instead of imagine if we made the pain that we feel the focal point instead of the cause of the pain. And that's what we do all the time in life, is we take the mistakes and make it the focal point. We look at the sin, we make it the focal point. We look at the failures to be disciplined and make it the focal point. And all of those all they end up doing is binding us. And to bring this back to my sabbatical, there was a lot of unbinding I had to do with myself of where shortcomings and failures for me as just a father, a spouse, a pastor, a community member, all of those things that slowly had built up over time because I didn't take the time to care for those things, to pressure release those things, and because of that, I was drowning in it. So.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the thought that I had when you were first sharing reappeared and made sense with some of the stuff that you've shared since then. But the idea that, like, sometimes when you're sick, you don't realize how sick you are until you start to feel better. And then you can look back and be like, oh man, like because you adapt and you just keep on going day in and day out, and it becomes your new normal. Yep. And you forget what normal was or what was possible.
Yeah, I often say the best I ever feel is 10 minutes after a migraine goes away.
Yeah.
And it's not that I'm any better than I am an hour after the migraine goes away. It's just that the intensity of the pain and the suffering was so right there that I can remember it. So.
Yeah. Okay, so if you had to choose 3 words to describe being on sabbatical, what 3 words would that be?
3 words to describe sabbatical. Beautiful, hard, and merciful. Yeah. Don't give me any more time. I'll want to redo those 3 words, and we don't got time for that.
That's great. It's good to go off the cuff, and even just the first 2, like just noticing that beautiful and hard can coexist. Oh yeah, is impactful, I think.
I look at my marriage to Tana, and it's been hard. Especially early on. I wasn't a good person early on in our marriage, and so our marriage has been hard, but it's also the most beautiful thing I get to participate in.
Yeah. So what limitations or practices did you implement that you found were really life-giving throughout sabbatical?
I think silence is a big one. I returned back to that. I don't have always something playing, music in the background or watching something all the time. The ability to just lay down and close my eyes and not necessarily be trying to go to sleep, but to just experience, silence. Um, so that was a big piece. And it's kind of one of those things when we slowly drift away from something that has given us life, finding it again, you're like, why did I let that slip away? So I'm kind of feeling that way. I wouldn't say I'm up to 2 hours a day yet, again, but it took some time the first time, and I'm sure it's going to take some time this way. But I think there was that. I think the other thing was permission to not feel like I had to study the text and read. And the irony in that was that, I've had the privilege of being a pastor for 20 years now, and I have studied a lot over that 20 years. And the beauty of it is, like, I think sometimes we don't trust our ability to use our memory as a tool for study, right? Like, I think about chess players. Some of the best chess players can actually sit and in their mind play a chess game. They're studying the game of chess without a book in front of them, without a chessboard in front of them. They're studying the game of chess. And I think one of the things that returned to me that, again, I had stopped doing was this sitting and studying the text in my mind. And that might sound silly to some people, I don't know, but to me, that's just because it takes that exterior pressure off, right? That external pressure of, like, do I have all the books I need? Do I have enough space? Do I have enough time to do all this stuff? But instead, it just kind of consolidates that. So I think that was a big thing. I think the other thing that was probably the best is that, with the stuff going on with my health, I just, if you are familiar with, like, mental health discussions and stuff, people often talk about having only so many spoons in a day. And I would have to determine what I could do to be a faithful member of my household based on conversations I knew I was going to have or had to have, because I knew that those were going to cost me spoons. And I think one of the things that was my favorite moments were some mornings just getting up and, like, this is gonna sound silly to people, but, like, just getting up and having energy and extra spoons that I could contribute to the household was healing to me on multiple levels, right? And I hopefully it was also encouraging to Tana, but I still don't nearly participate at the level that I should in the household, but I'm still learning how to navigate those spoons and how to use them, and thankfully Tana's patient with that. But just silly things like getting up and emptying the dishwasher because it was done overnight. I didn't have spoons for that before sabbatical, and I really, if I didn't necessarily have extra spoons on sabbatical, I just wasn't going to be using them up through the day, so I could determine that that's how I was going to spend them. Today, I'm going to spend those spoons on doing a couple simple things around the house that hopefully makes Tana's life a little bit easier, Malcolm's life a little bit easier. But so I'll stop with those three.
Yeah. So when you were working with your new limitations and boundaries in your sabbatical, how did you stay the course? What questions would you ask yourself as you decided what to do with your sabbatical time?
Are you talking about working this new job? Like,
no,
what?
no, just in general, like when you were first, like, limiting, like, contact from people, and you had all these new boundaries because you were trying to establish a sabbatical. How did you stay the course through keeping those boundaries? And when you were debating about when to let go of those boundaries, what questions did you ask yourself?
The questions I asked myself were, Tana, do you think this is healthy? I really depended on the people around me. Sarah, I asked you some of those questions, right?
Yeah.
I really leaned on the people around me that I highly respect and appreciate their insight into my life. Because I don't think, especially early on, I don't think I had the ability to be able to, in any meaningful way, identify healthy boundaries, right? So Tana, particularly, it was, I don't know, maybe sabbatical was more work for her than when I was working. So if so, I apologize, Tana. But she often was just constantly there to be like, I don't know if you should do that. What's your motivation for doing that? Just asking me the right questions, and never in a way that was like, putting her foot down, no way, don't do that type thing. But instead just experiencing her wanting the best for me, especially since I think we both realized that this is not something that's likely to happen again for a while for me. And so the idea of not using it wisely would be silly, right? And so I think Tana really represented that wisdom. And you and I's every 2-week sessions, you really provided me that wisdom as well. So I would say I depended on Tana and Sarah a lot to care for me and ask me good questions and remind me that I had permission to just keep floating down in my inner tube down the lazy river. And they helped tell me where the riverbeds were and stuff, so I could avoid those. So yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So how did you observe the presence of God throughout the sabbatical? How did God come to you? How did your relationship with God change over the sabbatical? Whatever
Yeah.
you want to take with that.
I think this goes to Lee's teaching last week in a lot of ways, in that scene with Jacob, where Jacob says, you've always been in this place. And, I had mentioned that the rabbis said that was him realizing God had always been there with him. And this place was his body and his own being, not necessarily Bethel itself. And I think that was a big piece to this, and still is, right? That I found myself before sabbatical saying, I need to pray more. I need to set aside time to be in prayer. On sabbatical, I just was present with prayer a lot. Like I would all of a sudden realize I'd been praying, or I've been thinking about people in a prayerful way. And I just found my heart once again bent towards God in a way that it's kind of like, that whole phrase being bent towards God is kind of the essence of a flower or a plant being bent towards the sun. And I think that because of just life, time, injuries, trauma throughout my life, that my sky got kind of filled with some smog. And as sabbatical took place and lasted longer and longer, some of that smog had some breaks in it, and the sun came through, and I just found myself being bent back towards the sun. And so, like Brother Lawrence, who said, it's as if I don't even have faith anymore because I don't have to believe that God's there. God just is there. I think, not that I'm at that level with Brother Lawrence, but there's a bit of that, right? That there was just a sense of, I think it's easy on days, especially in Toledo, right? October hits and goodbye sun until March, right? And it's hard to realize that, no, it's not goodbye sun. The sun is still shining just as brightly. It's just on the other side of that veil of gray. And I just need some of my veil to be torn away. So I guess I would say God renting the veil and letting the sun shine on me has been a huge blessing. I don't know that I did anything other than stand still for a couple minutes.
Yeah. Well, I love that idea about like thinking about people in a prayerful way, because if I would give myself credit, not even like I need credit, but if I would give myself credit for like all of the times I even think about people in our Dust community and wonder how they're doing, and maybe I don't always send a message, but I don't think about that as prayer. But if I would give myself credit of that as prayer, then I would consider myself a better prayer than I do. And
Well,
I think,
you need to start giving yourself credit for that.
yeah, I think that's
Everyone
like,
on this needs to.
yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to consider prayer, that breaking it out of like just whatever your tradition might have been, like I have to be on my knees, or the whole war room, I have to have a closet and I have to have post-it notes, or I have to write it down, or but that so much of how we're walking in our life and our thoughts um, of care towards people can be prayer as well.
Yeah, I think for me, it reminds me of we've been doing food for thought. Mitch, you could probably say about when this was, and we had someone come in and say, we should put up a big sign that says, we're doing this for Jesus. And I asked them, I said, do you not think Jesus knows? like it was, yeah, it was pretty early on, Tana. Like Jesus doesn't know that we're doing this. Hey, Craig. And that was, and I think the same thing's true with the way we think about prayer. We think unless we address God, like God's not going to know we're talking to them. Like if I just think, man, Sarah's been, experiencing this or whatever, and I just really, I wonder how she's doing. Like, I don't need to say, dear God, Sarah's been experiencing this. I wonder how she's doing. God, like, I think it was you that told me one time you used to fall asleep at night without saying amen, and she felt like she kept God on the phone all night, basically, because she didn't ever hang up.
Yeah, that was me when I was younger. I was
I
like, oh no,
it.
I didn't close my prayer, so all my weird dreams were sent to God.
Oh, that's
Did it
right.
count?
Yeah, but here's the thing. I think that even though we kind of are amused by that, I think so many of us punish ourselves and say, I'm not a good prayer, like you said. I'm going to quote you because I don't know if that word's right or not. I'm not a good prayer. But the reality is, Paul imagined that we prayed with the way we lived, the way we treated people. So pray with your feet.
Yeah.
And also that, I'm just going to break it to everyone now, because I often send people notes and just say, you were in my prayers this morning and I love you and just wanted you to know I was thinking of you. I'm going to be honest with you. Very rarely do I say, dear God, before any of those things when I say that you're in my prayers. But I name them prayers because I'm thinking about all of you and I love all of you. And I often pray for each of you.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a time when I was in South Africa on a mission trip, and when it was time to pray and everybody prays at the same time, as opposed to like here where it's like everybody be quiet and listen to each other pray. Like there, it's like everybody's just, it's like, why would you have one person pray at a time? You're not talking to each other, you're talking to God. And
Right.
Here you have like the prayers where you're praying by yourself, and yeah, there's a lot that goes on there too.
I can tell you that as a person that I admire the ability for people to be in that space and be able to be focused and continue their prayer. But for me, I'm just like, but you're right. The notion of one person praying and everyone else sitting and listening, it's almost like when we do prayers as lecture halls, which is strange.
Yeah. What moments or aspects of the sabbatical surprised you?
Well, I think one we kind of touched on already, the surprise that I needed another week or two before I kind of started reaching out to people. I really thought that at the end of that first 2 weeks, I thought midnight on that Friday night, I'm going to be like messaging everyone. And I think I was so surprised because it seemed so counter in my mind, because how much I depend and lean on this community is, you know, and I'm saying that very genuinely. Like I just depend on the love and the relationships that I have at Dust. And the idea of that going into radio silence for more than the initial 2 weeks. I mean, the 2 weeks seemed mind blowing, because I was like, how am I going to heal if the people that bring me healing aren't here? But the truth is, you all remain present, because I knew that you were all there for me. Hi, Blitz. And so, yeah. Aw, puppy. So, but yeah, I think that was one of the biggest surprises. I think the other surprise was I really thought I'd be good at sabbaticaling. There, I made up my own word too. When Ken Wilson said it's going to take you a month to get into the mode of sabbatical, I was like, 2 weeks tops, got this. I'm going to be able to sit, put my feet up, eat bonbons, and just enjoy the day and the freedom to do whatever I wanted. But the shaking, the notion of needing to be accomplishing things in order to feel worthy is so deeply ingrained in all of us. And the idea that those of you that helped fill in gaps at the church and stuff, that you all were working and putting in time, that Tana was upstairs working, that Malcolm was doing school, and the notion that here I am not accomplishing anything. I just realized how deeply seated that evil lie is. I'll be the first to tell people it's not what you've done or what you accomplish. It's the character you are. But yet, man, that's so embedded in each of us. And I wish I could find a way to magically remove it from everyone, because I think we all need that taken out of us.
Yeah, and that just makes you think of the idea or the phenomenon of like being able to embrace something intellectually or mentally and think that you have it, but then like realizing that if you actually walk it out and are honest in your self-reflection, that maybe it's a lot harder to walk out than it is to just be like, yeah, I get that. And
yeah, absolutely. Or you have, I think where I find too, Sarah, with this is that I will realize that I have gotten better at some things than other people, and then make the assumption that therefore I no longer have that same problem. Right? Like, so maybe I'm okay or comfortable with something that someone else isn't comfortable with. And so the perspective is, okay, well, I'm comfortable with this. And the truth is, no, actually, if you push just a little bit deeper, I'm still not comfortable with it. It's just that when I'm playing that comparison game, I feel like I've arrived somewhere. And maybe that's another thing that was surprising to me with sabbatical, removing everyone else really, and going off Facebook. And, as much as I've tried to be a Twitter kid, I'm not good at it. But not having social media blasting me all the time, I just really was able to stop the comparison game that I didn't even realize I was playing in a lot of ways.
wow. Yeah. And another like vein of that, I think too, with when we're embracing a concept and maybe we agree with it intellectually, or we hear something new and we're like, yeah, this is awesome. And then we have to put feet on it and try to walk it out in our own lives. And that takes a lot of time. And like you're saying, like, and then you might think that you made progress, but there's actually other layers in the same, like whatever topic area of growth that you're thinking about. And I think that's why this is just a good time to remember that we should try to spend time making things our own and living them out before we just verbally repeat them to other people. Like if I were to read a book and get a new idea and then just tweet it, which I don't tweet either, or Facebook, or shove it in other people's faces, like, you have to read this book, whatever. Like, well, that book or even that passage of scripture is impacting me in my season right now. And not to say that we need to always censor and every single thought that we have, but just pausing and making sure that we are sharing from like a more like a place of experience, as opposed to just like living off somebody else's faith or spirituality. Like, oh, somebody said something sounded good, I'm gonna like throw it back out at you, and it might not even be for you.
Yeah, this is where I think we can loop in the parable of the sower, right? That
Yeah.
oftentimes the seeds that we are trying to redistribute, so to speak, haven't even taken root yet, or it's not, it's barely on the surface. It's on we read or a quote we like, and that it's only healthy to harvest those seeds once they've been planted in the field and they've been watered and they've grown. Then you can harvest them. Then their value is able to then go and plant more seeds. And so I agree. I think too often this is a culture and a world that values and gives power to people who have answers. I'm not saying right answers, right? I answered a lot of questions on tests that were not right, and they were still answers. But we value people with answers. And because of that, we're often too quick, and so we never let any of the seeds germinate. We never let any of the seeds take root in our life before we start damaging the soil they're in by giving them away, or by using it as a weapon, or even just to elevate ourselves to make ourselves sound smarter or better. And then the worst part is when we're on the receiving end of that, it's often very condescending when other people are doing that to us. And it makes us second guess our own harvest. And the truth is that oftentimes those just are really unhealthy things being thrown at us. And it shouldn't make you question your own harvest.
Yeah, I think that's exactly why a conversation like today is extremely valuable, because we did talk about sabbatical before you went on sabbatical, and now we get to glean from you because you've lived through it, and it's different now because you're able
Yes.
to speak out of the overflow of experiencing sabbatical, as opposed to just before, where it was more of like an idea and even a priority and something that you believed in, but how long did it take you to actually put the time in and experience it? And now
Yeah.
now you have a different gifts to offer because you've walked through it.
Yeah. I'm not giving any of those gifts away. I'm keeping all of those. Mine.
Were there any difficult moments or periods of time in sabbatical besides what you've already mentioned that you want to share with us?
There was a moment about maybe 5 weeks in, where I broke through some of the superficial anxieties and depressions and hit some pretty deep, dark spots in my soul that rattled me. Now, the interesting thing about that was, because that on-ramp to that place allowed me to get up to speed, it's probably the shortest amount of time I've stayed in some place as dark as that was. And I think that's the beauty of a sabbatical, right? That most of us, don't have that opportunity, or don't even have that ability to take a sabbatical. But the notion of being able to ease your way in, to slowly, dip your toe in the water. It's cold, so you let your feet get used to it. Then you step in another step. Like that process, that on-ramping, allowed me to engage some pretty dark places in myself that didn't want to see light, didn't want to see the light. And I think, so yeah, that was hard. That was about week 4 or 5. And that lasted probably about 10 or 14 days, which in my history of depression and anxiety, that's like a timeout, 30-second timeout. So in a lot of ways, I felt it was both one of the hardest things I experienced during my sabbatical, but also really encouraging to me to realize that if I'm healthy, when those sinkholes open up, I'm a lot more capable of finding my way out faster.
Were there any aha moments or highlights besides what you've already shared that you wanted to share with us?
This is silly. I mean, not necessarily silly, but like, I knew that I loved you guys, but I didn't know that I loved you guys. Like, I often will talk about how much I just love the people at Dust and how I'm so lucky to do church and life with people that I care about, I want to be around, and that I like. But the aha moment was that I think sometimes we can say stuff like that, but not take the moment to embrace it. And I had the opportunity to embrace it, which is why, I mean, it took me almost 3 months for that to really come bursting out of my chest, which is why I reached out to you, Sarah, and was like, I need to come back. I want to spend Christmas with my family. I don't, you all know my experience growing up and the trauma of my household. And so the aha moment was, this isn't just, I love my church. This is, I'm in love with my church. So hope that doesn't sound too Hallmarkian. It's all right though, because it can be on the Hallmark Channel for a Christmas special.
Yeah, it's that time of year. That's awesome. So David says he's not crying. He just has something in his eye. So did the sabbatical give you another lens through which to see the world, your relationships, etc.? And how would you describe that lens?
I am a flat earther now. And in some ways I mean that not in the geographical sense. I think sabbatical flattened the world for me in a lot of ways. In that I had the opportunity to have a deep appreciation for, I'd like to say I have for a long time, but I think being engaged with very different thinkers, very different cultures and ideas about faith, about God, really just kind of flattened the earth for me, right? I grew up at a time where it was like, oh, don't dig that hole too deep, you end up in China. And there was such a sense that China was so far away that it was unreachable, that it was a mystery almost, right? And internet, in a lot of ways, I think, as Friedman actually wrote a book called The World is Flat. And it was about how technology has made us all neighbors, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I think that for me, it's that the earth is flat in the sense of faith, theology, God, and the desire for the well-being of eeach other. And I really don't know how to explain it, because I don't think anyone would have thought I didn't feel that way before. And I would argue that I did, but there's something a little bit more real about it now.
Awesome. So this kind of next question touches back to what kind of close to where we started. So sabbatical is sometimes described as an extended Sabbath. So did you observe a weekly Sabbath in the midst of sabbatical, and how did you distinguish that? And will the sabbatical impact how you observe Sabbath in the days to come?
So, what's funny is I probably was less focused on Sabbath during my sabbatical. And now the reality is, I wasn't doing anything on Sabbath either, but it was almost all kind of blurred together. Half the time I didn't know what day of the week it was. I think it will change because I'm gonna miss it. I'm gonna miss, when you read like some of these rabbis who say like on Wednesday they start celebrating and thinking about the Sabbath is almost here, and there's like an excitement and a joy of like only 2 more days till Sabbath. I always wanted that, right? Like I always wanted to feel that way and that excited. And I'm hoping that something like that rises in me, because it'll be like a kiss of my sabbatical. And again, I think that puts me in a unique place of privilege to have gotten to experience a sabbatical. That Sabbath can feel like, I think, Amanda, you put earlier that napping is like a spiritual discipline. The rabbis would say that sleeping was like 1/60th of death, and not in a bad way, but just that we experience what death is like in sleeping, and sleeping is peaceful and beautiful and good for most of us, right? So I think in some ways Sabbath is going to be that 1/60th. Rabbis can be excited because they aren't cooking and cleaning for Sabbath. I'm not going to touch that one week. Anyhow, I think that I'm hoping that Sabbath becomes a reminder of it being like 1/60th of my sabbatical. You got 3/60ths this morning, Craig. Fair enough.
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's the opposite, but the opposite is also true of Sabbath, where like, so now Sabbath can remind you of the sabbatical, but one of the things I think about Sabbath is that if I can get into a Sabbath rhythm, and then it bleeds into the rest of my week as well, and I carry that that feeling throughout the week.
If Sabbath is making you bleed, you might be doing it wrong, Sarah. I'm not trying to tell you how to Sabbath, but.
All right, well, I want to take a minute. Does anybody have anything that they want to say or ask based on Don's sabbatical? We'll open the floor up if there's any questions or just comments based on what we've shared or insights that you have. Everybody's been pretty quiet today, but I think that's because Don had a lot of awesome things to share. Craig?
I had a whole bunch of stuff written down.
Yes.
But he pretty much answered all of it in the 15 minutes since I've been here. But the one that wasn't really answered yet, which I assumed was going to come up soon anyway, what advice would you give to someone who was going to do a sabbatical?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Were you here when I was talking about discipline, Craig?
No.
Okay. I would say give yourself permission to not do it right initially, and just let yourself, like, discipline is the permission to make mistakes and keep going, right? And I just think that that's the most important piece, because sabbatical is going to look different for everyone. And my next sabbatical will look different than this one. And where we have to begin is from a place of self-mercy, of I'm not going to get this right today. And then the next day, I'm not going to get this right today. But that continued striving towards it. So that would be my number one advice, is to take all the pressure off, because man, I put so much pressure. I was like, all right, I need to get fixed, and not in a veterinarian way, before the end of this sabbatical. And it wasn't until I started giving myself permission to fail at that I actually started to get healthier.
I said one of the questions was, were you confined by the rules? And I'm like, well, of course the rules.
Right.
You're going to be confining. So I imagine that's one of the things you had to deal with early on, and I'm glad you did. And thanks for answering my question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm a rule follower, and a lot of people I don't think necessarily initially believe that about me, but I'm very much a rule follower unless the rules harm something. So yeah, I very much followed the rules that were in place for me. So, which I think might be surprising for some people, but not surprising to me.
Yeah, I think rule is another word that has sometimes some negative connotation, like even in monastic circles when they talk about a rule of life, and that people can have like a negative feeling about that. But I thought I heard one time that like the root of it is really more like the idea of a trellis that a vine can guide to grow and climb, and that's what the rule is meant to be, is like a guide. And
I love that. And
yeah.
I also love any excuse to use the word trellis. It's such a good word. I really like that imagery. That's great.
All my questions are for Tana, so I'll save them for next week when we interview her about Don's sabbatical.
Ooh, that's a great idea. Next week, Wade interviews Tana. Is that what I just heard?
That's what I heard.
That sounds like a great idea to me.
Amanda, it sounds like a great idea to you, so you won't have to teach next week.
Oh, that's right, Lee.
Exactly.
Lee's on it.
No. We've already created a new plan. Let's go with that one.
Well, I think Tana needs 2 weeks, so there's that.
I got the Michian no from Tana, so.
I did write down questions for Tana too. I'm glad there's going to be a next week.
The 20th. How about the 20th for Tana?
Sounds like a
Would that be
hashtag.
Anna is saying no, folks.
Yeah, Tana will
And we
get
have
all
to
of
be-
ours by private messenger.
And we have to be that kind of church where we actually respect people's consent. Dang
Yeah.
have it.
Yeah. What kind of church are we?
Yeah.
Kind that doesn't get sued.
Thankfully.
Any other questions or insights from anybody?
This really isn't for Don, but I just want to say that I am really, really grateful for Sarah, Lee, and Andrew, who really stepped up. Andrew has been doing the Zoom host stuff in the background almost every single week. And Lee and Sarah and some other folks have really stepped up. I know that there's other people that have filled in too, but I really appreciate hearing from Lee and Sarah a lot over this time, their insights and all the teaching. You know, I'm part of Dust originally because of Don and Tana, but I really feel like I'm part of Dust now because of the community that has been built here. And I am so grateful for that.
Yeah, I concur, Amanda. I had a couple of my pastor friends say, so did you line up teachers before you left? And I said, yeah, my church. Like, yeah, like I had like other pastors get worried when they leave for sabbatical, like what's going to happen? You know, do I need to bring in someone in the interim? And I was just like, I had complete faith. So, but thank you for saying that, Amanda. I really agree 100%. So thank you to everyone who continue to take care of each other in the midst of this.
And the great thing about Dust is we're so heretical that you don't have to worry about undoing all the heresy when you come back.
Excellent. I was worried about that.
In case you missed it, Don, we no longer drink Kool-Aid, we drink Fresca. So just, to keep up with the times.
Are you still wearing white Nikes though?
I'm not sure.
Also, to piggyback off what Amanda was saying, Amanda was a huge part of the planning committee around the sabbatical and carried a lot of the administrative stuff. So that was one thing I was going to say, Amanda, only including you in all of that wonderful praise at the end. So thank you for doing that. Yeah, we all dropped the ball a lot. There were so many moments within the sabbatical committee where it was like, what are we doing? What did I say I would do? What day is it? It's tough.
Yes, I second Sarah Mainardi. She, Amanda always undersells herself and downplays the significant role she has had in encouraging us and just helping us all stick with this without Don. So, yeah. Yay, Amanda.
All right, well, my last question, I've been reading a lot about Francis de Sales, so I'm going to ask you a Salesian spirituality question.
Not Sicilian.
Yeah, not Sicilian. So what, and I like this question. I think you're familiar with this question. I think you asked us this question when we all thought back in spring that we were going to come out of this pandemic and be able to carry things and move forward. And now we're back. But one of the phrases he uses is, what do you want to let go of? And what do you want to hang on to?
I feel like all my answers to that are both big and almost too Hallmarkian or expected, but they're true. I want to let go of a lot of the hurt and the darkness that I've had in my soul, and a lot of the trauma and stuff that I've experienced that has found itself embedded in my bones, and I want to leave that. I want to hold on to that deep desire for being reconnected with the community that brings me life and everything. And I also want to hold on to that. I don't need to accomplish something in my personal life every day, right? That, like, I was telling David Kissinger the other day that part of what helps with the job at Nurse Now is that's kind of like mowing the grass. Like, and I think I told you this too, Sarah, you know, when you're mowing the grass, you can see where you've mowed, you can see the lines, there's instant feedback of getting something done. With pastoring, oftentimes you don't see that until years later and someone comes back to you and thanks you, or someone, you know, you don't necessarily see the results right away. And so you just live on kind of the hope that there's results. And I think that the sabbatical has taught me that I don't need to see the results to believe that there are results. So I hope that I really, unless you're not a piece of metal, yes, that's true. So like, yeah, shame is instant feedback. See, this is where, like, all of y'all, I can't wait till we're back together so I can get more back into the shame game. So yeah, I think that's what I want to hold on to.
Awesome. Any last thoughts from anybody before we close up and move on to what's next? Prayer requests? Well, thank you, Don. Is there anything else that just bubbling out that you didn't get to say in the midst of that?
No, I think I got to say everything that, I mean, I didn't know I was going to say, because I didn't know what questions they were going to be. So
Yeah.
no, I think I'll have more things to say as time goes on. And I think, this is one of those things where sabbatical is going to keep giving to me over the next several months.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for being willing to do this.
of course.